Through history, we have learned trade, new technologies, new means of transportation, and new medicines. One thing we haven't learned, however, is what caused a disease that was part of one of the most deadliest pandemics in human history. The Black Death has had many names. These include the Great Pestilence, the Plague of Florence, the Great Plague, the Great Mortality, and simply the Death. Scandinavian writers coined the expression Svarta Döden, meaning Black Death, to signify the terrible aspects of the horrible death that resulted. It was an apt term for a disease that wiped out vast numbers of human beings and inflicted widespread despair, grief, and fear. As a popular poet once put it, the upheaval caused by the Black Death was the world turned upside down. Traces of the Black Death can be found as far back as 430 BCE. An outbreak occurred in Athens, Greece in 430 BCE, caused by the same disease. Outbreaks also happened in Egypt, Persia, and Rome a century later. Growth of international trade and military invasions provided ways for it to spread rapidly from one population to another. The bubonic plague arrived in the 6th century Common Era, raging through Arabia, North Africa, Asia, and Europe. The death toll from what this disease became called the Justinian plague was greater than that of previous epidemics. The plague didn't entirely disappear, but entered a long phase of withdrawal, with occasional local outbreaks, mainly in Central Asia. By 1347, the plague had taken control of the Tartars in Asia Minor, which is today called Turkey. Christian minority, in this case the Jews, were blamed and burned alive. Then the Tartars chased Genoese merchants back to their trading post Kaffa on the Crimean coast, which is today called Feodosia, Ukraine. When the Tartars were killed by the plague, the Genoese at first rejoiced. God had answered their prayers and punished their enemy. Then the Tartars began launching the corpses of plague victims over the walls of the city, hoping that the smell of rot would kill everyone in town. The smell didn't kill the Genoese, of course, but the disease did. The panicked Genoese threw the corpses back or submerged them in water, but it was no use, as they were already exposed. As the dying Tartars retreated, the Genoese fled by ship to Sicily, taking the disease with them to Europe. Some medieval Europeans were aware of a mysterious disease sweeping through Asia in the 1330s. From Central Asia, it traveled along an established trade route, passing through Turkestan and the Black Sea region, otherwise known as Crimea and the Byzantine Empire. From the Mediterranean ports, it took two routes, one through France, making its way to England and Ireland, and another through Italy, spreading to Austria and Germany. When it hit Europe, it traveled at an average speed of 4 kilometers per day. There were 3 versions of the Black Death. The bubonic version was the most common. Its name derived from the swellings that appeared on a victim's neck, armpits, or groin. The size of these swellings ranged from an egg to an apple. These symptoms usually meant that a person had up to 1 week to live. It spread through infected fleas attaching themselves to rats. The pneumonic version attacked the respiratory system. It spread through breathing the exhaled air of the victim. Life expectancy after getting this was 1 to 2 days. The septicemic version attacked the blood system and could occur with either the bubonic or pneumonic plagues. In the East, a gush of blood from the nose was a sign of impending death. For all types of the plague, the sick vomited incessantly and coughed up blood. So, the Black Death spread through an increase in trade and military invasions, inhaling water droplets that were inside a sick person's cough or sneeze, or even touching anything that the sick had touched. It was this contagiousness that allowed it to spread so quickly. Some people shut themselves up in houses where none were sick, eating the finest food and the best wine. They allowed no discussion of death or sickness. They passed the time by music and such pleasures. Others thought the sure cure was to drink and be merry. They sung and amused themselves, satisfying every appetite, laughing and jesting at what happened. They spent day and night going tavern to tavern, drinking moderately. They also went into other people's houses, doing as they pleased. They could easily do this because people felt doomed and abandoned their property. So, most houses became common property to those who went in and used them as if they owned them. With this bestial behavior, they avoided the sick as much as possible. There's a third option that some people chose, which was a midpoint between being stuck in the house or being dissolute and drunk. They satisfied their appetites moderately, and they went about carrying flowers, scented herbs, or perfumes in their hands, as they believed it was an excellent way to comfort the brain with these odors, since the air was infected with the smell of dead bodies, sick persons, or medicines. Finally, there were those who simply felt that they had to go away from the sick to be safe. They abandoned their city, houses, dwellings, relatives, and property, caring only about themselves. They went abroad or to the country around their city or town, as if God was punishing those who lived in the city center and wouldn't reach out to those in the countryside. No doctor's advice, no medicine could overcome or alleviate this disease. When people began dying in France, King Philip VI turned to the Paris College of Physicians, the most highly regarded medical authorities of the time, to learn of the cause. The physicians produced a report that blamed the mass deaths on an event that occurred at 1 p.m. on March 20th, 1345, the triple conjunction of the planet Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. The report explained that Jupiter, a wet and hot planet, soaked up evil vapors from the Earth, and Mars, a dry planet, ignited the vapors and spread them through the air, which is how Europe got enveloped in a fog of death. If this sounds crazy, remember that they were the most highly regarded medical specialists at that time. Interesting, a fog of death. So how do you stop an evil, polluted fog? The physicians' logical recommendations were: people were urged to burn aromatic woods, but other scents would do as well, such as rosemary, amber, musk, and fragrant flowers. When they walked, people took their scents with them, carrying packets of scented herbs. Avoid activities that would open the pores to amisma, which is a corruption of air. These activities were bathing, exercising, and physical intimacy. Avoid sad thoughts about death and disease. To not sleep during the day. They were also advised to not eat meat or figs. There were so many bodies being brought to the churches every day and almost every hour that there wasn't enough consecrated ground to give them a proper burial, especially since the families wanted to bury them in the family grave, as was the custom. Cemeteries were forced to dig huge trenches where they buried bodies by the hundreds. They stowed them away like the bales in the hold of a ship, covering them with low earth until the whole trench was full. Dead bodies quickly filled up the streets, as many people ended their lives both at night and during the day. Many others who died in their houses were only known to be dead because their neighbors could smell their dead bodies next door. The survivors were more concerned to get rid of the rotting bodies than to be moved by charity towards the dead. With the aid of porters, if they could get them, they carried the bodies out of the houses and laid them at the door, where every morning quantities of the dead might be seen. They then were laid on briars or, as these were often lacking, tables. Also, with the ministers and the priests being the ones who were in contact with the sick the most, they were either sick or dead, and church attendance dropped. Feeling that God had turned his back on them, they did the same to him, through gluttonous banquets, drinking, gambling, and wearing the best outfits. Markings were placed on the doors of those who were sick to warn others. The result from this was being cut off from society. A rise in the cost of labor due to worker shortages. The cost of goods rose, but food didn't, due to reduced population. A breakdown of social order followed, as hardly any neighbor helped another, and relatives never or hardly visited each other. Brother abandoned brother, uncle his nephew, and sister her brother. Fathers and mothers refused to see and tend to their children as if they weren't theirs. With ministers and executors of the laws being dead, sick, or with their families, authority of human and divine laws almost disappeared. Thus, any man could do anything they pleased. Today, there are a few occasional cases of the plague that occur every few months. There are 10 to 15 cases that occur every year in the southwestern United States. In 1996, 2 deaths were attributed to the plague in the U.S. These cases resulted from contact with infected wild animals. There are several antibiotics that can effectively treat the plague. There is also a vaccine for those at high risk of exposure, such as military personnel. It requires multiple doses and frequent booster shots, and has significant side effects. The vaccine is not for general public use. Up until today, the plague has killed over 200 million people worldwide. The most widely known outbreak was in the 14th century Europe. This was the bubonic plague, otherwise known as the Black Death.